When I graduated from college, University of Florida, I graduated as a second lieutenant ROTC in the United States Air Force.
And why did you switch to the Navy?
Well, because I wanted to get into the flight program initially in the Air Force, and they were full. So I thought I'd give the Navy a try, and I met a lieutenant where I worked with the Air Force, and he happened to have been an Annapolis graduate who had sea sickness and couldn't perform on a ship, and he told me how to make the inter-service transfer. So I followed his instructions, and I got transferred over to the Navy. And then the Navy said, we'll put you on an aircraft carrier and see how you do. And if you do okay, we'll send you to flight school.
All right, so I want to ask you about that. But now this was 66 when you went into the Navy?
Yes. I went in the Air Force in 65 when I graduated. I spent a year in the Air Force, and then I transferred in 66 to the Navy.
Now, your first service in the Vietnam theater was aboard the USS Kitty Hawk, is that right?
That's correct.
The carrier. What was your role on the carrier?
I was a CIC officer, Combat Information Center, Combat Information Officer.
So what did your work in the CIC involve?
Well, they started me off as a surface line officer because that's what I was. I was an ensign, and they put me in surface, and I said, okay, fine. Once I got qualified in surface, I started looking to improve myself, and so the air picture was where everything is happening on a carrier. Right. And so I asked the CIC officer, Commander Jack Case, if I could qualify over an air pitcher. Well, air pitcher is run by aviators. The whole air pitcher is run by aviators, and surface is run by line officers. So he said, sure, I'll give you a try, see if you can handle it. So he put me under instruction, and wasn't but a month or two, and I qualified in the air pitcher. So that's when I switched over there and did the rest of the tour as an air officer.
Now, when you say you wanted to go to air because that's where the action was, meaning just, that's the purpose of an aircraft carrier really, is to be a floating airport. Is that mainly what you mean, or do you mean that's where the action was as far as the war went as well?
Well, that's where the action was. That's where the war was. The air pitcher is what carriers exist for, and so I wanted to be where that was because I knew that was the pathway to getting more qualifications and getting a better fitness report. And almost anybody can do the surface, but I wanted to prove a surface officer could do the air pitcher, and so that was my goal.
Sure. So what kinds of things did you do in air?
You do everything. The CIC air pitcher does everything. They launch every hour and a half, 23 airplanes, 22, 23, every hour and a half for 12 hours. And you wait and fight the war for an hour and a half, and you recover those 23, and you launch another 23. And that's what you do for 12 hours. Now, CIC has to check their transponders going out. They have to check their transponders coming back in because we'll shoot you down if you don't have a good transponder. We have to find areas where you can dump hung ordnance because you can't bring everything back to a carrier. If you have certain ordnance, they will not let you come back with that. So you got to find a place where you can dump it. So I would call surface and say, what do you got for spare ocean? And they would give me a range and bearing. I tell the planes where to go and dump their ordnance. But it's handling emergencies all day long. That's what you do, is handle emergencies.
What kinds of emergencies came up?
Well, I'll just give you a typical example. We have an F4 calls me on the radio, and he says, strike, because that was the voice we answered to, strike. I got boundary layer problems. And I said, okay, what do you want me to do? He said, do you fly the F4? And I said, no, I don't fly the F4. He said, well, then you should know what boundary layer is. And I said, okay, hold on. So I called Air Ops and I said, hey, what's wrong with this guy? He's got boundary layer problems. And he's yelling at me. And the guy said, he's got boundary layer problems. And I said, yeah, he's got boundary layer problems. He said, he can't land with boundary layer problems unless he has speed over the deck. And I said, oh, no shit. That's probably why that's why he's yelling at me. So I call him back and I say, how much speed do you need? And he said, something like 32, 34 knots. So I call the bridge and say, hey, man, you got to give me 34 knots across that deck. I got to land a boundary layer problem. And they knew what it was. See, that was one of the problems. If you're not an aviator, you don't know that. I didn't. The guys who were in there who were on watch before me and after me were aviators. They knew what that was, but I didn't because I wasn't an aviator. But I learned quick. I know what boundary layer is real quick.
Wow.
So we got the knots over the deck and we landed the guy. That's just a typical example of hung ordnance is another one. My radios are out, or that frequency is out. I need another one. I'll tell you one where we had an F4 had problems. They got hurt, and they had to go punch out. Well, the airplane, the F4, landed on a sandbar, intact.
Wow.
So when I reported that, the admiral says, "Make sure the pilots are out. Make sure the pilots are out. I don't care what you do. Make sure the pilots are out." Then the captain of the carrier says, "Bomb that thing as soon as possible." And then Air Ops says, "We got to divert an airstrike," and it just went on and on. Everybody wanted something new. Oh, wow. So finally, I compromised, and I had a plane fly over it, make sure there's no pilots in it, and then I diverted an alpha strike, which is a main strike, just to bomb that airplane. That's just a typical thing that happens every day. Those kind of things happen every day.
And that was to ensure the plane didn't fall into the hand of the enemy?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's stuff on the classified stuff.
Now, you've indicated that you had some planes that were damaged. Did you lose any planes?
Oh, yeah. We lost planes all the time. That's the problem with naval aviation in the middle of a war. Yeah. You launch 23 and recover 21. Wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we lost them. Absolutely. It was horrible.
What was, can you think of an example when you realize you lost a plane, what's the response when you realize you've lost a plane?
Well, generally you get a report from the wingman, one way or the other. Either the lead or the wingman tells you they're hit and they're punching out. And then the other plane, whoever survived, gives you a shoot open report, feet wet, feet dry report, and then you notify the helo for rescue. That's how it kind of works.
Feet wet, feet dry, meaning the parachute went.
You're over land and you punch out, or you're over water and you punch out.
Yeah. Would you go on to hear things, reports that the pilot was surrounded by North Vietnamese or anything like that ever?
No, you don't get those because most of the time the planes are on a fuel critical basis. Right. We have an hour and a half cycle. Yeah. So F4s can go an hour and a half at war power settings and survive, but A4s could not. A4s started to run out of fuel. Yeah. So we had to have a tanker in the air all the time to tank the A4s who were running short of fuel. So they didn't hang around a whole lot. They will give you a shoot report, and that's about it, and a position. Wow. That's about it.
Do you have a sense of how many planes the Kitty Hawk lost in the time you were there?
No, because I it was not something you mentally want to keep track of. I just know we lost a lot.
Yeah. And when were you in Yankee Station? Was it 67?
Yeah, the whole year. We got there at the beginning of the year, and we were there for 10 months.
Wow. So you're going to go on to serve on Swift boats, so you're going to have a very different experience. I
got totally different stories about Swift boats.
Yeah,
that's small boat combat.
Yeah, but if the Kitty Hawk, if that was your only experience of the conflicts in Vietnam, what did the conflicts look like from that perspective? What did the war look like from the perspective of an air officer in the Combat Information Center aboard the Kitty Hawk, 1967?
Well, it looked like we got targets. I got to see where the targets were because all those forms came into CIC. It looked like we got targets from someplace. I didn't always know where they came from. And it looked like we sent 23 airplanes every other hour for 12 hours to bomb those targets. It was kind of impersonal. That's what I lived with. I launched airplanes for 12 hours a day and stood down for 12 while they repaired them. And we never got strike damage. We never got that kind of stuff. The only way you would get that is if you talk to the pilots at the wardroom or whatever during chow. It was rather impersonal. It was a war for the Navy surface war. It was an air war.
Yeah.
It was take off, bomb, and hope to God you get back in one piece.
Now, how did you make the transition from a Combat Information Center air officer to commander of a swift boat?
Well, I went to the commander of CIC, it was Jack Case, and I said, I want to make a career, but if I can't get into the flight program, I said, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get into something more surface. So I said, call your detailer and tell him you want to get off the carrier. So I did. And I called the detailer, and he said, Joe, there's only 3 ways you're going to get off that carrier as a surface warfare officer. And I said, okay, what are they? And he said, number 1, you die. I said, well, that's not very much fun. So what do you got for 2 and 3? And he said, number 2, we're looking for UDT officers. And I said, what the hell is a UDT officer? And he said, those are the guys that swim around and blow things up. And he said, it's not a very good career enhancing, and it's mostly run by enlisted guys. So it's probably bad for your career.
Yeah.
I said, okay, what else you got? He said, well, we have openings for PCFs and PTFs, depending on your level of experience with boating. I said, well, I'm born and raised in Miami. I grew up on boats. So he said, okay, I can get you a set of orders to the PCFs. And I said, okay. So that was it. Within a very short period of time, a set of orders came in, and they detached me from the Kitty Hawk over to the Amphib base, which is over in North Island. And there I was in swift boat school.
In swift boat school at Coronado?
It's at the Amphib base at Coronado, yes.
Yeah. And what does PCF stand for?
Patrol Craft Fast.
Right, okay. Okay, so you go through that training and you then become the commander of a PCF. And where are you based in country? Are you down in the Mekong?
Well, a buddy of mine who was on the Kitty Hawk with me, he also went to the swift boat, and he was at An Thoi. An Thoi is a little small detachment down in the Phu Quoc area, and it's an island. And so he said, that's where I am. If you want to come down here, we got pretty good duty. I said, well, what kind of duty? He said, well, we got the only air conditioning in Vietnam, because he lived on an APL, a living platform, which the Navy anchors, and you work off a living quarters platform. But it was the only air conditioning in Vietnam, I think. And so I went to An Thoi, and that's where I started my career on the boats. But you only can stay for as long as the monsoons don't drive you out, because you can't patrol in monsoons. The weather is too bad. You can't be out there. So I patrolled there for 3 months, 4 months, and then I went to Da Nang for another 4 months, and then I went to An Thoi. Chulai. Chulai. Finished out in Chulai. But the big deal with Phu Quoc was the top of the island. That was on the Cambodian border, and that's where you got shot at all the time, because that's where they came across the Cambodian border.
So you're in far southernmost South Vietnam.
Yeah. But if you look at the map of Vietnam, you'll see the Phu Quoc Island goes all the way up. It's a huge island.
Yeah.
It goes all the way up to the Cambodian border. And that's where that one was unique. And then I Corps was unique because you're on the DMZ. And you would go up, you got too close to the DMZ, they would actually shell you with artillery. They actually had artillery up there. So I actually got shelled several times up there.
So I want to come back to Da Nang and then Chulai, but let's start in An Thoi. When you think about the missions you did there, and it sounds like you're doing primarily just working to prevent goods from getting into South Vietnam from Cambodia.
Right. Exactly.
So you think about those missions, I wonder if there are 1 or 2 missions that especially stand out in your memory from the time in An Thoi?
Yeah, the worst one actually was the first big fight. Uh, there was a small little estuary river type thing that apparently uh, the Viet Cong used all the time, and I was warned about it. And I had actually dropped off Green Berets there. They kind of went into that stuff and did stuff they didn't talk about. But when I went up there my very first time, uh, it was daylight, broad daylight. And we were at general quarters because you have to be at general quarters if you're less than 1,500 feet of the beach. Mm. So we were at general quarters, and I could hear rounds going off, a lot of rounds going off. And the next thing I could see was the water around me. It all started to flutter.
Wow.
Okay. That was the very first time I ever got taken under fire.
Yeah.
And combat, small unit combat on the water is totally different than the land. You got to remember, when you get shot at on the land, you hear the round, but you never really see it land. But you do on the water. You see every single round hit the water.
Wow. Yeah.
And you're there, and you got no foxhole. You got nothing you can do. There's no armor on those boats. They're 1/4-inch aluminum. So you instinctively, the crew could not shoot unless the officer tells them to fire. And so, man, I gave the word like instantly, and we fought with these guys for like next to an hour.
Wow.
Because we got out of small arms range and started lobbing mortars on them. Because we had an 81 millimeter mortar. That's a pretty devastating weapon.
Sure. And they were on the beach.
They were on the beach, yeah.
Okay.
And that's the kind of stuff that went on virtually every other day. If you wanted to get shot at, if you wanted to start a war with them, you simply played a Chuhoi tape. We had a cassette tape deck on the boat with big outdoor loudspeakers.
Yeah.
And we would stick a Chuhoi. Do you know what Chuhoi stands for?
Yeah, the surrender thing. Yeah.
Okay, so we had Chuhoi tapes, and we would play the Chuhoi tape over the loudspeaker. And as soon as you did, they would open up on you.
Wow.
Yeah, that was, and that was our kind of our guinea pig purpose to get, and then we would back off out of small arms range and call in airplanes.
Okay.
That was what we did.
Yeah.
And they would bomb them. We didn't get, I want to be honest, we didn't get first line bombers. First line bombers went to the north. Okay, those are the guys who took off, went to the north. But what I got was second line bombers, which means when they came back, they had ordnance. Because you can land on a big long runway with ordnance, so you can't do that on a carrier. Right. I would get those guys, and so the forward air controllers would give me those guys returning to do the bombing for me.
How many sailors were on the Swift boat?
We had a crew of 5, 1 officer, and 1 interpreter.
So you've got 5 enlisted guys, the officer, and the interpreter?
Yes, that's who we had. That was the crew.
So 7 altogether. How confident were you in these ARVN guys you worked with?
Well, my interpreter was excellent at interpreting the Vietnamese junks that we stopped and searched. But he always pretended he could not speak any English. Well, if you can't speak English, you can't do interpretation now, can you? Right. Because we only had limited Vietnamese. They sent us to Vietnamese language school, by the way. Okay. But it was like 3 weeks, and you can't learn the Vietnamese language in 3 weeks. Right. So I could speak limited, the crew could speak limited, and he pretended he could speak no English. So my leading petty officer, who was the guy that I put in charge of the crew, he comes to me and says he won't stand watch. A 3-man and 3-man, they were on port and starboard 4-hour watches. And I said, what do you mean he won't stand watch? And he said, no, he pretends he can't, he doesn't, comme bien, I don't speak English. I don't understand. He kept saying, comme bien, comme bien. Oh. So I said to him, okay, I said, as soon as it gets dark, as soon as the sun goes down, it gets dark, I want you to bring him back to the fantail, just you and him and me. So he says, okay. I said, and by the way, whatever I say, you just go along with. You got it? And he says, yeah, okay. So we go back. It's dark, or it's getting dark, and he brings the interpreter back there, and there's the three of us, and we're standing on the fantail. And I said to him, Pete, now explain to me why he won't stand watch. And he said, well, Skipper, he pretends he can't speak English. He says he can't speak any English at all. And so he's no good on the watch. He can't answer the radio. He can't do the helm. He can't do anything. So I said, okay. I looked around and I said, Pete, I said, as soon as it gets real dark, I said, we're going to shoot him and throw him overboard. And you should have heard what Wynn came out with. He started yelling and screaming. He understood every word I said. And that was the end of when he stood watch from then on.
But I mean, why would an interpreter, a person who's given the job of interpreter, pretend not to speak English? It doesn't make any sense.
He didn't want to stand watch.
Oh, I see.
So if he could prove he couldn't stand English, he didn't have to stand any watch. That's why he did it.
Did you take from that any larger significance? So I mean, this reflects on the individual, but did you take from this any larger significance, such as why are we here fighting for this guy's country if he doesn't seem to be interested in doing his part?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we came away with. Why are we here? I knew why I was there. I didn't have any problem at all with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Yeah. To this day, I'm not sure 100% exactly how it happened.
Right.
But the story was the PT boats came out and attacked them. Yeah. The Turner Joy and the Maddox, whatever.
Right.
And then the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed. And then the Accords, the Geneva Accords of '54. So I was happy with why we were there legally.
Yeah.
I was not happy with fighting for a country that didn't seem to care that much about their own country. In other words, they were good with me risking me and my crew risking our lives, but they weren't that happy risking their own. It was very hard to get the ARVN Navy to come in and join a fight because they were out there, but they didn't want to come in and join fights with us. Yeah. And we could have used the help.
How would you summarize your time in An Thoi?
There was about 10 patrol sectors, but only 3 of them did you really get shot at. The other 7 were kind of laissez-faire. Yeah. So it was boring unless you got one of the 3 hot zones. Mm. So that was my experience of Phu Quoc and An Thoi. Yeah. It just depends on what patrol sector you got. If you got a hot sector, you got shot at. If you didn't do anything. So everybody wanted the hot sectors, of course, and there was only 3 of them, in my opinion.
Yeah. Were any of your sailors wounded in the?
Yeah. My rear machine gunner took shrapnel in the arm. We were actually in a river, and he got hit with shrapnel in the arm, and we're fighting in the middle of a big fight, and he got off his gun and came up front and held out his arm with a piece of shrapnel in it. Wow. And he said, "Look, Skipper, I got wounded." And I pulled the shrapnel out of his arm, and I said, "Don't ever leave your gun again." I started swearing at him. "Get back to your gun." I mean, right in the middle of a fight, he did this. Wow. So he knew I was pissed. You don't leave a gun in the middle of a fight. So nothing was ever said. Nothing ever again was said. He put a bandage on it. It was no big deal.
How was the swift boat service in Da Nang different from what you experienced down in Southern Portland?
Well, Da Nang, the patrol sectors were different. You had the whole I Corps all the way up to the DMZ. And so those were different sectors. Most of those were supposed to be secure, except for Alpha Station. Alpha Station was on the DMZ. The swift boats were the northernmost legal unit to go up on the DMZ. Nobody got any further north than we did.
So are you on the river right on the DMZ?
No, we never went on rivers. Swift boats were always on the ocean till the latter part of the war. Then they started to go up rivers, but they never did it's up until the end of '68, till '69, they were never in rivers,
Okay.
unless they were a big giant river.
Right.
They never went up small rivers. But there was the DMZ and that area up there had a couple of rivers where the PBRs were. The PBRs were up in those rivers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So Claviette is where the PBRs were, and but the DMZ was a place where if you wanted to get shot at, all you got to do is run up there, and we ran dark, so all you had to do is turn the light on, and then they would start shooting artillery at you.
Wow.
So that's where the New Jersey was. She hung out right at the DMZ.
Yes.
So you could see the New Jersey on your radar every night.
Wow.
And my first patrol up there, I got taken under fire with artillery. And all you do with artillery is you push the throttles up and kind of change positions real quick. So I got on the radio, and in plain English, I started calling the New Jersey. It put to couple all that stuff up, put to couple it, but I didn't. I said, hell with that crap. So I called the New Jersey on the radio, and I said, can you shoot for me? And he said, yeah, what do you need shot? And so I just gave him the coordinates, and boy, you should have seen the sky light up.
Wow.
And the New Jersey started shooting up there and silencing who was shooting at me.
Wow. So down in far southern Corps Corps, you're trying to stop stuff from coming into the South from the series of trails connected to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. What's the basic mission up in northern I Corps?
Well, that was to just search junks.
Okay.
And shoot gunfire if you had to. If gunfire, if a unit got under fire, you could put an 81 mortar on them pretty quick.
Oh.
So they would call. But to be honest, the Army didn't know a whole lot about the boats. You had to kind of explain to the Army who you were and what you did. And
wow.
So, yeah, right. Whereas the Marine Corps knew a little bit more about us.
Right.
Down in July, they knew a little bit more about us.
So, once the Army learns about you, then it sounds like they would call in and you'd provide fire support for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did evacuate a squad of Army guys. They were taken down to the water. They were being shot at, and they couldn't get away. So they called me and said, "Can you evacuate a squad of Army?" And I said, "Well, I got almost a 6-foot draft here." I said, "All I can do is nudge it up on the sand. Can you guys wade out?"
Yeah.
And so they said, "Yeah, we can do that." I said, "Okay." So I put ladders out, and I just nudged it up on the sand, my bow, and they waded out with their guns over their head. And I took them on board, and then I was stuck. I couldn't get off. So I called another boat, and another boat threw a line around me and pulled me off the sand. And then they nudged up and took the second squad off. So we salvaged a couple of Army squads.
Wow. And where did you drop them off back in Vietnam?
We took them around, about 40 miles away to a Marine Corps base. And I called the Marine Corps, they were called CAP units.
Yeah.
And I called the CAF unit, and I said, "Can you send some boats out?" And they said, "Yeah. What do you need boats for?" I said, "Well, I got 2 Army squads here. I need to get ashore." So they said, "Okay." So they sent the boats out, and we loaded them in the boats. And there was like a second lieutenant Army guy in charge, and I said, he got in the boats, and I said, "Lieutenant, I'm not telling you how to run your outfit, but you really need to take your packs off."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because if that boat capsizes, you're going to go into 50 foot of water, and you ain't coming out."
Yeah.
And these boats only had about a 6-inch freeboard. Okay.
Wow.
So any wave could wash them. So
wow.
So they finally took their packs off before they went and got on the boats.
Now, was your time in Chulai, was that pretty much the same stuff as what you're doing up in Northern I Corps?
Yeah, but it was supporting the Marine Corps
Yeah.
Almost exclusively.
So it's interesting because when you're in far southern 4 Corps, there you're doing work that sometimes involves the Air Force jets that will provide support for you. And then in far northern I Corps, you're doing operations with the Army. And then in southern I Corps, you're doing operations with the Marine Corps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so covering
It was,
the,
like I say, it was different. It was different. The three patrol areas were
yeah.
different.
Just to see if we can cover every base, did you do have any kind of interaction at all with Coast Guard guys in Vietnam?
The Coast Guard guys operated what is called a WPB.
Yeah.
That was an 82-foot Coast Guard cutter,
Yeah.
and they essentially had 3 miles out, and I had 3 miles in
Oh,
to the shore.
yeah.
So we really didn't get much together. I knew they were there, and they knew, but they never really were available to support me in a fight, and I never really was available to support them in a fight. We were
Yeah.
just too far apart.
In terms of fighting, um, was the was the time in Fort Corps down in the southern Mekong, was that where you saw most fighting, or was there a significant amount of fighting up north as well?
You know, it was like about the even. If you wanted to get in a fight, Fort Corps, the three patrol areas that were hot, you could get in a fight every day. In July, you had to you basically responded to what the Marines were doing to get in a fight, and the Koreans were there,
Yeah.
and we used to get calls from them for gunfire support.
Wow.
Okay, in
Yeah.
I Corps, it was all Army, and again, they didn't know that much about us,
Right.
and I Corps had pretty good artillery support on their own, so they didn't need me. My job was primarily junk search because they're going to come in from the north.
Yeah.
They're going to come in on that coastline.
When you're searching these junks, I mean, I imagine you found a lot of stuff over the months.
No, not really. The junk that came where we were fishermen transporting goods, that sort of thing. I never found contraband, and we searched a hell of a lot of junks.
Yeah.
Our presence, I guess, was the big deterrent
Right.
because you can't put a lot of armament on a junk.
Right.
Okay,
Sure.
so the bigger junks went out further from the coastline. So that was the Coast Guard. They had those guys.
Right.
And then the airplanes, the P2Vs and the P3s, they had the air pitcher. And if they saw something big coming in, they would alert you. And I only got in my whole time, I got one alert from headquarters saying there's a steel hull junk coming your sector. Take under fire. So I said, "Oh man, this is the greatest thing in the world to take under fire a steel hull junk." Yeah. So I could see it on radar. It's coming in, and we were all dark, and we were all at general quarters. Yeah. And you have to challenge everything that you shoot at. Right. You have to challenge it with the code of the day, and they're supposed to put their recognition lights on to give you the code. Right. Well, they didn't do that, and they didn't answer my challenge. My quartermaster challenged them on the light. They didn't do it. So I said, okay, so now we know it's the enemy. He's not answering our challenge. So we're all ready to go. We're all ready to sink these guys. And just at the last minute, the LPO comes up and he says, "Skipper, we need to put an loom round over them so we can get a better shot at them." Yeah. And I said, that's not a bad idea, Pete. Why didn't I think of that? So we stuck a 81 millimeter loom round. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they light the whole sky up. Right. So we put an 81 millimeter loom round right over the top of this thing. I got pretty good at it over time. I could set the fuse on those things and put them exactly where I wanted them. So we lit this thing up, and I looked at it and I said, "That isn't a junk. That's a submarine." Really? Wow. And they went, "Holy crap, we almost sunk a submarine." So we started flashing at him, and all of a sudden he started flashing at us like crazy. And he started coming over the radio like crazy, saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? I have swimmers in the water. I have swimmers." He was dropping seals off.
Did you drop off seals anywhere? Or
I only did one operation with UDT. I never did one with the SEALs. Okay. UDT was more prevalent in '68 than the SEALs were. Okay. They were everywhere, and they did what is called a beach survey. I don't know if you're familiar with a beach survey, but what happens is they put 3 guys ashore with a big giant pole with a sharp tip on it, and they jam it into the ground. And then they run a wire out about 100 yards, and the wire is held by a little boat with a little motor on it, hold taut. And then they put a UDT guy every 10 meters. So there's 10 of them in the water, and then they take a breath, go down. They have a slate, and they mark the depth of the water. That's called a beach survey.
Oh, I see.
And they go along the beach for about a mile, so that if you have to land there, you can land and know what the beach is about. All right. So what happened was the UDT guys were being taken under fire. They were getting the shit shot out of them because they have no way to protect themselves. So they requested the swift boat would be in front of the wire and suppress fire. So I got to do that just one time, and nobody shot at us because they weren't going to shoot at a swift boat, that's for sure. Right. And they put their officer on board your boat, and he would talk to the guys on the radio and tell them what to do, and that's all I ever did.
Well, so earlier I asked you, what the Vietnam War looked like from the perspective of the Combat Information Center. What did the Vietnam War look like from the perspective of a swift boat commander?
Well, I say this with reverence because it was the greatest adventure of my life, to be perfectly honest. Where in life does a young man who's like 22, 23 years old, maybe going on 24, where in life are you given a 50-foot boat that's armed to the tooth, right, with 6 guys, and you can almost do anything in the world with it? Right. Where will you ever be given that opportunity? Yeah. And that's what they gave me. I mean, literally, I could shoot almost at anybody I wanted to. Wow. I could destroy almost anything I wanted. All I had to do is get one round, shot at me, and right, I could shoot back pretty heavily. And when I couldn't stop, I could call in airplanes or I could call in shipboard artillery, because the Coast Guard had a cruiser that was always hanging around, and they didn't get much chance to shoot. So they would always be on the radio with us thinking, you got something we can shoot at? You got something we can shoot at? And I said, yeah, I'll find you something you can shoot at. So, but it was the greatest adventure of my life. But the problem is you can get killed doing those great adventures. Right. Okay? Right. So it was scary, to be honest. But when you're young, you think you're immortal.